everything is child abuse under Oklahoma law. I'm Tulsa Attorney James Worth, and that is the topic that we have. There's a new statute that is going into effect, which triggers a presumption against someone getting custody if the court finds they've committed child abuse. And that kind of triggered me looking at the statute that defines child abuse for that purpose. And I can tell you there is a lot that would be included by that statute, more than many people would suspect. Child abuse doesn't always mean child abuse when we have the Oklahoma legislature defining things. They tend to sometimes define things in a much different sense than people would expect. So what does child abuse mean under these circumstances? Well, if you're interested in statutory interpretation or want to go through this exercise yourself, I suggest you do because it's interesting. You can go to Title 10A, Section 1-1-105, and that's part of the Oklahoma Children's Code. It's the definition section. So it's got definitions for all these different things. But the first one that we start off with is abuse. So we're talking about child abuse. So what's the definition of abuse? And this is the definition the statute says to use. And it says that abuse means harm. That makes sense. But it also says it means threatened harm. So if harm is threatened to a child, that is abuse under the law. And it's harm to the health, safety, or welfare. So what exactly does that mean to threaten the safety of a child or threaten the welfare of a child? It's not clear. Those things aren't defined in the statute. But then it also talks about it is included, but not limited to, non-accidental physical or mental injury. So now I've added in a mental injury, and it says limited, including but not limited to non-accidental physical and mental injury. So if it's not limited to non-accidental, does that mean that includes accidental? So is a threatened, accidentally threatening the welfare of a child, is that child abuse? It's not completely clear, but it does talk about harm or threatened harm. There's a separate definition for that. So what does harm or threatened harm mean? And that goes down, it means any real or any real or threatened, again, doesn't have to be real, just has to be threatened, physical, mental, or emotional injury. Okay, so now we're talking about emotional injury. So if you threaten an emotional injury, according to this, that's going to be child abuse. And then it goes on to say that it's including but not limited to, and it's got sexual abuse, sexual exploitation, neglect. So it includes neglect. So if you threaten neglect, if you threaten to neglect your child, according to this, you're guilty of child abuse. But then neglect is further defined. So we can scroll on down here and go to subsection 48, and it says what neglect is. Neglect means the failure or omission to provide any of the following. It has a long list of things. So it's adequate nutrition, affection, food, clothing, shelter, medical or dental, supervision, failure or omission to protect the child from use, possession, or sale of illegal drugs. Okay, illegal activities, abandonment. So this goes pretty wide here. So child abuse equals threatened harm. Harm equals neglect. Neglect means a failure to provide any of these things. So if you threaten not to take your kid to the dentist, are you guilty of child abuse under the statute? Looks like you probably would be. What about if you allow the child to go with the other parent walks across the street outside of the crosswalk? Well, then you neglected to protect your child from exposure to illegal activity, because it says illegal activity does not define illegal activity. So, jaywalking is a misdemeanor offense. It also talks about the use of the use, possession, sale, or manufacture of illegal drugs. Well, marijuana, legal in the state of Oklahoma, if you have a medical card, is still illegal under federal law. So if you drive by a dispensary, has the child been exposed to the possession of an illegal drug? If you use medical marijuana and the child sees that you've possessed it, have you exposed the child to an illegal drug? Or if you allow visitation to the other parent, knowing the other parent has a medical marijuana card, have you committed child abuse by failing to protect the child from being exposed to an illegal drug, even if it's not smoked around the child, but the child is aware of the possession? Abandonment. Abandonment is separately defined. So neglect includes the failure or omission to protect the child from abandonment. Okay, well, how is abandonment defined? Let's go up. That's subsection 1 here. Means the willful intent by words, actions, or omissions not to return for a child. So if the other parent fails to come back for the visitation, fails to return for the child, you keep the child safe, but the other parent fails to come back, did you fail to protect the child from the other parent abandoning them? That appears to fall under the statute here. So at that point, you're guilty of child abuse. So under the right facts and circumstances, if you have a custody battle, the attorney on the other side reviewing those facts, reviewing the statute, could probably make an argument that something fits under there. So the statute is very wide. If you're interested in statutory interpretation, I really recommend you look at this and try to scope the edges of where child abuse ends, because it seems to go on forever. And one thing defines another thing, defines another thing, and next thing you know, anything can be twisted and to be argued to be child abuse. So if you're dealing with a circumstance in Oklahoma courts, you're going to want to talk to an attorney that's familiar with the law of the state of Oklahoma and how it can be used unfairly against you and fairly to protect your rights. To talk to an attorney at my office, you can go online to makelawEasy.com.